If you cry, I'll leave you handcuffed there forever. That's what he said without even looking at us, as if arresting 2 little girls was the most normal thing in the world. My name is Betty Ruth Jackson. I'm 82 years old today, and I'm from Decatur, Alabama, a small town where everyone seems to know each other, but no one sees anything. I grew up there with my mother, my sister Debbie Lynn, and him. I don't even like to call him stepdad, you know, because stepfather is just a nice word to hide what he really was. A man who came into our lives as a savior and became our prison. But look, let me tell you how it started. I'm not going to play the poor girl. I just want you to listen, because there are some things that we put away for so long that it doesn't even seem to have happened. But it did. The first time he handcuffed me, I was 9. Debbie was 7. And he, the man my mother used to say had saved us from poverty, had that thick glass in his hand, already a bit crooked from the drink, his belt slung over his shoulder, and his keyring swinging. He loved that sound. We shivered just listening to it. Mom was asleep, as always on those nights, or pretending to be asleep. I don't know. Together. You're going to stay together so you can learn to shut up. We hadn't even said anything, darling. Not a word. He tied our arms with those old iron handcuffs. He squeezed until he cut the skin. Then he dumped us in the back room, the one that smelled of mold, and had only a thin mattress on the floor. He would lock the door and disappear, but he'd come back. I always came back. Debbie looked at me with wide eyes, trying to understand what was going on. I'd stopped asking. I just told her not to make a sound, that if we kept quiet he'd forget about us. A lie, right? But it was the only hope I had for my sister. You know how it is, right? When no one listens, you learn to shut up before you even feel it. The pain came later. First there was fear, the fear that stopped your body, that made you turn to stone. I wondered what I had done, what Debbie had done, but the answer was always the same. Nothing. My mother? Oh, she said he was a good man, that at least now he had meat on the table, shoes on his feet. He's tough, but he's a man. I'd hear this while I was washing Debbie's bruised hand with cold water, hidden away. Mom didn't see or didn't want to see. One day I asked, Mom, why does he handcuff us? She didn't even blink. It's so you can learn to behave. I almost laughed. Nervously, you know. How can anyone think that's normal? That was the routine. He'd drink, stare at us with that droopy drunk eye, and decide that the night was for punishment. When the handcuffs weren't enough, then came the punishment of silence. No dinner for those who disrespect me. Disrespect was anything. Breathing wrong was enough. Once Debbie peed on her clothes out of fear. He made her kneel in the corn of the henhouse on her knees, with the handcuff attached to my hand. I stayed there, holding her so she wouldn't fall. Every minute there aged me a year, and I was still a girl who already knew what quiet pain was, the kind that doesn't scream, just throbs inside. But there was one night, a night you can't forget. He was drunker than usual. The house was silent, and when he locked the door to the little room, he took longer. It was different. The key took a while to turn, and that's when I realized that night was going to be worse. He threw a blanket over us and said, if one of you gets up, I'll do worse next time. And he left, and the door was locked, and we stood there, Debbie and I, shivering under that dirty cloth, listening to the noise of the old TV on outside and his laughter, the laughter of people who think the world is a toy. Debbie hugged me tightly. Her hand was sweaty. Betty, is he coming back? Don't think about it, Deb. Just go to sleep. Just sleep. But who sleeps in fear? No one. The next morning, we were released as if nothing had happened. Mom was in the kitchen, frying eggs. Go to school, girls. If you're late, you'll get a scolding. A scolding? If it was just a scolding, my child. We went to school with the iron still branded on our wrists. I rolled up my coat sleeve and told Debbie to do the same. Nobody asked. No teacher, no classmate. Everyone saw, but no one did. Because poor people, young girls, and even younger girls who lived with a working man, nobody cares, right? That morning, walking with my feet dragging on the hot cement sidewalk, I made a promise. One that I still didn't know how I was going to keep, but which became my silent prayer. One day, I'm going to get out of here, and she's coming with me, even if I drag the chain to the end of the world. But for that day to come, a lot still had to happen. If you've made it this far, leave a like, will you? Every like is like a hug for this old lady. Tell me in the comments where you're hearing this story from. That day, Coming home from school, the sun was beating down on my back, and I didn't even feel it. My body was there, but my head had already turned into something else. I walked, and all I could hear was his voice repeating in my head, "If you cry, I'll leave you handcuffed until the sun comes up." It wouldn't come out. And when fear gets into your blood, even the wind feels like a threat. Debbie came to my side quietly. She didn't say much after the bad nights. She just held my hand tightly, as if I could protect her from everything. But I was just a little girl too, and sometimes I wanted someone to hold my hand in the same way, but there was no one. Mom had already become a shadow. She couldn't see us anymore, or chose not to. At home, he was already there, sitting on the balcony with a beer in his hand and his cap tossed aside. When he saw us, he smiled in that sickening way. It was that crooked smile that came before the storm. He said it was just a joke, that it was to teach respect. But who respects someone who traps children like animals? We walked past him like crossing a minefield. We went straight to the bedroom. Debbie started to take off her uniform, but stopped in the middle and stared at nothing. I went up to her and held her shoulder. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My sister's silence screamed more than anything. That night, he didn't just drink beer. He went for whiskey. When we saw the brown bottle on the table, we knew. It was a night from hell. Mom pretended to tidy the cupboard, but her eyes were lost. I tried to talk to her. I said that Debbie had a stomach ache and that she couldn't stay in her room alone. All she said was, "Then sleep together," without even raising her head. Sleep together? As if that would solve anything. He started with the noises, the key turning in his finger, the dragging breath, that heavy gait in the hallway. When he stopped in front of our bedroom door, I froze. Debbie was already lying down, hugging her pillow. He opened it slowly, like someone who enters a room they already know. And he did. He looked at me, then at my sister. He made that sound with his mouth, like an impatient tss. He took the handcuffs out of his jacket pocket and pointed with his head. I stood up slowly, feeling my soul leave my body. Debbie began to cry softly. He hated crying. He said that if she made any more noise, he'd tie her to the chair in the living room. We went downstairs. He made us sit on the floor facing each other. He put handcuffs on our arms and then walked away. He stared at us like someone admiring a sculpture. That wasn't punishment. It was pleasure for him, a kind of sick control. I closed my eyes and tried to think of something else, but I couldn't. The iron tightened, my body ached, and the fear kept me from breathing. A while passed, and he went upstairs. He said he was going to take a shower. We stood there in the dark, listening to the tap and the sound of the water falling. I told Debbie quietly that we were going to get out of there, that one day he was going to leave. She asked if her mother knew what he was doing. I didn't answer. Silence answered for me. The next morning, the neighbor knocked on the door. Mrs. Ruth, the one who always brought cake on Sunday. She said she'd seen the light on downstairs at dawn. She asked if everything was all right. Mom said yes, she always did. He came up behind her and laughed. He said that the girls were afraid of the dark, and that was why he left the light on. She laughed along, uncomfortably. He offered her the cake and left quickly. We stared out of the window. Debbie nudged me and said quietly, "She saw it. She saw it, Betty, and she still left." I wanted to say that it was normal, that nobody wanted to interfere, but I swallowed. It wasn't normal. It was just common. At school, a new teacher showed up. Mrs. Annette. She had curly hair and spoke with a northern accent. She looked at me on the third day of school and called me over. She said she noticed that I always stayed close to my sister. That was nice. I just shook my head. She asked if everything was all right at home. I replied as always, "Yes, everything's fine." She didn't insist, but at the end of the lesson, she put a note in my notebook. "If you need help, I'm here. Even if you think it's no use." I read that note about 20 times. I kept it inside my pillow. It was the first time anyone seemed to see it, but looking was no use if no one did anything. And every night, he seemed more daring. Now he was saying that we were used to it, that there was no point in frowning, and that if he told anyone, it would be our fault. Words that stuck like glue to our skin. One Saturday he drank so much that he passed out on the sofa. The key fell out of his pocket. I picked it up. I hid it in the bathroom cupboard. It was the key to the handcuff. My hand was shaking. Debbie asked what I was going to do. I said, "Nothing yet, but now we have a way." She smiled for the first time in weeks. Only he noticed. He always did. It was as if he had eyes in the walls. On Monday, he called us down to the basement. He said he was going to teach us not to hide anything from him. We tried to explain, tried to tell him it was nothing, but he was angry. The anger of a man who feels challenged. He grabbed his belt. He hit the wall first. Then he hit the floor. Then, that night, Debbie passed out. She woke up at dawn vomiting. I cleaned her up with the sheet. Mom came to the door, looked in, and didn't go in. She just said, "You tease him, Betty. You keep trying to be clever." I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. My whole body was shaking. The next day, I waited at school until everyone left. I went to Annette's classroom. I handed the note back. She read it, looked at me and said, "Do you want to talk now?" I shook my head. I said just one thing. "Help me. He'll handcuff us." She closed the book on the table. She took a deep breath. She said she was going to do something. And that's when hope returned, but along with it came fear. He became suspicious when he realized that we weren't crying the same way anymore. Debbie started looking at him with hidden anger. And I stopped putting my head down. It wasn't courage, it was exhaustion. There comes a time when fear wears off, you know? The pain becomes part of the skin, and all that's left is that dry hole inside you. Mom kept pretending not to see. Worse than pretending, sometimes she said that he was our real father, that he was doing the best thing. Best for whom, my God? At school, Annette started calling on me more often at the end of lessons. She didn't force anything. She just offered me a cookie and asked how my day had been. It was the only time I felt like a person, you know? She listened. She didn't try to fix everything. She just looked at me as if I wasn't invisible. One day, she gave me a piece of paper with a number on it. "If anything happens, call here. It's a secure line." I didn't even know how to use a telephone, but I kept the number inside the sole of my shoe. It cut my foot, but it was my only amulet. At home, the mood changed. He was quieter, more attentive. He started locking the cupboards, hiding his keys, leaving his belt hanging on the kitchen hanger like a trophy. His mother, even more bitter, started picking on him. The rice wasn't ready, the floor wasn't shining, the laundry wasn't folded properly, and each scolding came with his shadow behind it, peeking out, as if she were training us to accept the next punishment. That week, he drank less. We even thought it was a sign of respite. Illusion. Bad men don't get better, they just change tactics. One Thursday, Debbie dropped a glass on the floor. The noise was dry, loud. I froze. So did she. He got up from his chair without saying anything. He went into the kitchen. I held her hand. What followed wasn't a slap or a shout. It was silence. Silence of the worst kind. He looked at us like someone measuring what he was going to do. And all he said was, "We'll talk later." We slept in each other's arms, shivering. The night had no chain, no key, no punishment. But the fear stayed there, stuck to the wall. The next day was the longest of my life. At school, I tried to pay attention, but my body was somewhere else. Teacher Annette called on me again. This time, I cried. No sound, just tears. She held my hand, and that's when I spoke. I told her about the basement, the handcuffs, the punishment with corn on the floor, the locked nights. She went pale. She said she was going to carry on, that it couldn't go on. I trembled. I asked her not to talk to my mother. She promised she would do it the right way, that no one would know it was me. But he did. 2 days later, a social worker arrived at the house. She was wearing a suit, her hair was tied up, and she had a fake smile. She said she had come to assess the conditions of the home. Mom turned white. He didn't even blink. He served coffee, talked pretty, showed us the garden as if we lived in a fairy tale. He said we were difficult girls who made things up to get attention. And the assistant, oh my goodness, she wrote everything down with that pen that wouldn't even touch the paper. In the end, she looked at us and asked if everything was all right. I looked at Debbie. She looked at me, and we lied, as usual. "Everything's fine. Yes, Mom." That night, the key turned again. The handcuff was back. Only this time he brought gagging tape. He said that now we were too talkative, and he spoke softly, with that tone that chills even the soul. "Do you think anyone is going to take you away from me?" And he laughed. He laughed like he'd already won. We were tied up all night, unable to call out, unable to react, just crying our eyes out. And I knew he was right, because now, on top of everything else, there was the shame. How to tell someone after lying to their face? How to explain that we lied out of fear? Professor Annette waited for me at the gate the next day. She said that the assistant had reported that everything was fine. She asked if I had changed my mind. I shook my head. My face was swollen from not sleeping, and my arms ached from being tied up. But I couldn't say anything else. She didn't give up. She handed over another piece of paper. If you change your mind, call. It can be from anywhere. Just say your name. I kept the note inside my panties. It was the only place he didn't look. On Saturday, he left early. He said he was going to the bar. His mother was asleep, as usual. Debbie asked quietly if we could try. I didn't even answer. I went to the bathroom, got the key I'd hidden again, and unlocked the drawer where he kept his change. I took out a few coins, some crumpled notes. It was all we had. I put on our backpacks with old clothes and waited for him to leave for real. When we heard the gate close, we ran. We didn't even look back. We went to the grocery store where there was a payphone. I was shaking so much that I could barely turn the numbers, but I managed. On the other end, a woman's voice answered. She said my name. She said we needed help. She asked for the address. She asked us to stay hidden. We waited behind the market, in the sun, for hours, until the car arrived. There were 2 women. One of them cried when she saw the mark on Debbie's arm. The other hugged me tightly. And I couldn't even speak. I just let them take us. The 2 women took us to a place that looked more like a hospital than a house. It smelled clean, and there were people talking quietly. Debbie clung to me the whole time. Anyone who came close, she hid her face in the crook of my arm. One of them, the youngest, had good eyes. She said we could trust, that no one would hurt anymore. I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe so much, but my body still ached. And more than that, fear still spoke louder. We stayed in a small room with 2 separate beds. But for the first few nights we slept together. There was no other way. Every time I turned off the light, my sister would start shaking. I'd wake up to her sweating, crying soundlessly, clutching the sheet, and I couldn't sleep properly either. I'd close my eyes and see him, with his face dirty with rage, holding the key, turning the iron, telling us to shut up. It wasn't just a memory, it was a tattoo on the inside. On the second day, a psychologist came to talk to us. She was beautiful, well-groomed, and smelled of expensive soap. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, as if she was afraid of breaking something. She asked us our names, how old we were, what we liked doing. Debbie remained silent. I answered. Did I tell you everything? Number only half? I still couldn't. It was as if the words needed courage to come out, and we were still gathering courage in the bucket. The days passed. We changed our clothes. We took hot showers. We ate leisurely. It seemed like another world, but my head couldn't keep up. With every step out of that room came panic. Has he found us? Is he coming? Did Mom tell us where we went? Because yes, until that moment, our mother was still in doubt. Would she come after us? Would she ask for us back? Or did she not even care? The answer came quickly. On the afternoon of the 5th day, a woman in a grey suit entered the room with a clipboard in her hand. She introduced herself as a court official. She said our mother wanted to talk. She was outside in a private room. I froze. Debbie grabbed my arm as if I was going to fall. The psychologist tried to calm me down. She said no one could force us, but I wanted to see it. Not out of nostalgia, out of necessity. I needed to know what she had to say. The room was cold. There was a table in the middle and a chair on either side. When I entered, she was already sitting down. Her hair was up, her eyes were deep, and she was wearing a flowery Sunday dress. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. And she started. She said that I had destroyed her family, that I had exposed her life to others, that I lied, that I've always been rebellious, that I pushed Dad around. I just listened, without blinking. Her every word was a knife, until she said, "You'll come back. This will pass. He's already promised me he'll never touch you again." At that point I laughed. I swear. I laughed out of nervousness, because if I didn't laugh, I'd scream. I got up without asking. I left the room without looking back. When I returned to the bedroom, I found Debbie lying with her eyes wide open, as if she could feel what I had heard in her chest. I lay down next to her, and I promised again, we're not coming back, not even dead. The next day the paperwork began. They asked if we wanted to go to a temporary shelter or try to stay with a relative. A relative? What relative? We never had any. The only chance was the shelter, but they said it was difficult there. Too many children, not enough space, strict rules. I said yes. It didn't matter. Anything was better than that house. We were taken in an old van with dark windows. Debbie slept leaning against me like she used to when she was younger. When she woke up, we were already at the gate. The entrance had high bars. The principal greeted us looking sick. She wasn't mean, just tired. People who have seen a lot of pain and are no longer surprised. She directed us to the dormitory. Beds lined up, each with a blanket and a small cupboard. They gave us a toothbrush, soap, and new clothes. Everything looked clean, but the air was heavy. Too many children with too many sad eyes. You could feel it. For the first week no one spoke to us. We were the new ones, the ones who came with a story. I heard whispers, people saying, "They're the ones in the handcuffs." I didn't even get angry. It was true. Yes, we were. And worse, I didn't even know how to be anything else. Over time, a girl called Tracy approached me. She had chipped front teeth and red hair tied up with shoelaces. She sat next to me at lunch and said, "I ran away too. From my dad. That's all." And he stayed there. That's how the friendship began. With Tracy, I started laughing again. A little, but I started. She was angry. She would hit if anyone touched her tray. She protected the little ones. She taught me where to keep the extra bread, how not to get caught when I cried, how to fold my clothes so they looked new. And Debbie liked her, which was a miracle. The following month, visits from the carers began. They said they were going to find us a home, a family that would accept sisters together. But it was difficult. Marked children are scary. And two, nobody wanted them. One afternoon, they called us into the supervisor's office. She said they had found a possible home, a couple with no children, from a neighboring town. They wanted to meet us. They made an appointment for Saturday. I didn't know if I was feeling hope or despair. And Debbie then? She'd been pale ever since she heard. On Saturday we went. The couple were nice, smiling. They had a house with a dog and a swing in the yard. But they looked at us with pity. And I don't want pity. I want a place. I want a chance. We were polite. We answered everything. But I already knew. It wasn't going to happen. And it didn't. The answer came on Tuesday. They said that the couple had changed their minds. They needed younger children. Debbie cried. I didn't. I was getting good at keeping my tears in. And it was there, my dear, that I understood. No one was going to save us. We began to realize very early on that in that shelter, anyone who doesn't learn quickly becomes a target. It wasn't just the other kids. It was the system itself. People who clocked in to pretend they were looking after us, but who left us in a corner, hoping that time would erase everything. But time doesn't erase anything. It just pushes the pain deeper down inside, where no one can see it. And when it does, it's too late. Debbie started having blackouts. Out of nowhere, she would stop responding. She would stare at nothing, as if her mind had gone. I tried pulling, shaking, calling. Sometimes she'd come back, sometimes not. They called it trauma. I called it escape. Her mind tried to escape when her body couldn't. And my goodness, watching your sister learn to disappear inside is one of the hardest things I've ever been through. Tracy was still our only light. She taught me the corners of the shelter as if it were a city. The drinking fountain that gave the coldest water. The bathroom that nobody used in the afternoon. The guard who slept on duty. She was smart. She'd been from 5 different homes and she didn't trust anyone. But she trusted me. One day, she gave me an old notebook and a bitten pen. Write in here when your chest gets tight. I'll do it. And that's how I started. It wasn't pretty. It didn't make sense. But I wrote. What hurt? What I remembered? What I wanted to forget? I wrote like a letter to myself from the future. The director of the shelter came to talk to us. She said she couldn't guarantee that we would go to the same home. That if a good opportunity arose, we might have to split up. I froze. I said no. That Debbie wouldn't last a week without me. She said it wasn't my choice. It was the law. And that's when I started to think about leaving. Tracy spoke of a plan. There was a woman, Mrs. Evelyn, who delivered fruit to the shelter every Monday morning. She was old, slow, left the truck door open while she unloaded. If we want to disappear, it's that way. I thought it was crazy, but I started watching. Every week Evelyn arrived at 8 o'clock. She brought boxes and boxes, always alone. The employees helped, but no one kept an eye on the truck. She would leave the back open for almost 20 minutes. I spoke to Debbie. She cried. She said she didn't want anywhere else. She just wanted to stop being afraid. I promised. I said that if it worked, we'd disappear from the map, become something else, live again. We planned for days. Tracy helped us. She packed a backpack with hidden bread, kept some juice in a plastic bottle, took an extra coat for each of us. She said she wasn't going with us, but that she hoped it would work out. On Monday, I woke up before the sun. Debbie was already sitting up with her backpack on her back. She didn't say a word. Her eyes said it all. We went downstairs slowly, acting normal. We got our coffee and sat down away from the staff. When we heard the noise of the truck, our hearts almost burst out of our mouths. Tracy came up behind us. "This is it. Good luck." She hugged us tightly. I'll never forget it. We went to the back pretending we were going to take out the garbage. The gate was ajar. Evelyn was already unloading. We ran behind the truck, climbed in quietly, and slipped between the banana boxes. The smell was strong, but it felt like heaven in there. We stayed quiet, squeezed in, praying that no one would notice. The truck moved. Every bump was an eternity. I don't know how long it took. It could have been half an hour. It could have been a whole day. When it stopped, we waited some more. We heard voices, the noise of a forklift, the sound of a box falling. We only left when the silence returned. We opened the door slowly. It was a huge warehouse full of fruit. No one around. We jumped out and ran. We didn't look back. We walked down streets we didn't know. Each person was a risk. We avoided talking, asked for food at doorsteps, lied about our names. We said we were the daughters of a sick woman, that we were going to visit an aunt. One lady gave us bread, another offered soup. We slept in a playground, on church steps, even in a laundry room. Nobody asked too many questions. They just wanted us to get out of there. On one of those days, we met Mr. Carl. He owned a small grocery store on the other side of town. He saw us hanging around and called out. He said he wasn't going to deliver, that he just wanted to help. He gave us food, a blanket, and a corner in the back to sleep one night. I was suspicious, of course, but he just wanted to help. He said he had a daughter who ran away too and never came back. Maybe seeing us was his chance to make amends. Carl kept us hidden for 3 days. He said he was going to talk to a woman who helped girls in situations like ours. She could give us shelter, documents, another start. I almost didn't believe it, but I was tired, very tired. When she showed up, I was surprised. Young, strong, with a firm voice, she introduced herself as Rachel. She said she ran a safe house, far away, where girls like us could start again. I looked at Debbie. She nodded. She had a fever. Her face was pale. Her lips cracked. The decision was no longer a choice. We had to. We got into Rachel's car with just our clothes and Tracy's notebook. She drove for hours. She told us that she had helped many girls, that she knew what to do, that no one would find us. I wanted to believe her. More than anything, I wanted it to be true. We arrived at a simple but clean house. There were other girls, some quiet, others laughing, all with the eyes of someone who has seen too much. Rachel showed us the rooms, explained the rules and the timetable. I just listened. Debbie was already asleep on my lap. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I almost didn't recognize. Security. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a chance. Rachel used to say that every girl who arrived there carried a world on her back. Some spoke on their first day, others took months, and there were those who never spoke at all, but even the quiet ones had the same look, the one that knows what it's like to sleep with your body locked up and your soul screaming. She never pressed. She just asked if we wanted tea, an extra blanket, or if we needed some space. Sometimes the mere fact of someone asking was enough of a novelty. The first few days were confusing. We woke up startled, expecting to hear a key turning, a door slamming, that thick voice telling us to shut up. But there was only the sound of other girls breathing. Some snored loudly, others cried in their sleep, and I understood them all. No one there was normal. Nobody there was just a child. We had become adults by force, sewing our bodies into pieces that no one could see. Debbie was slow to let go. She would spend the day clinging to me, carrying a doll she got from Rachel. It was an ugly rag doll with stitched eyes, but it was the first thing she'd had that was hers alone. I watched without interrupting. When she started talking to the doll on her own, I saw that some part of her was still alive. The childhood they had tried to erase was showing signs of resistance. The house had a routine that seemed light but was firm. Waking up early, breakfast, group reading, small tasks to keep the place organized. Nothing forced, but with rules. The idea was to give structure, to show that there is order without fear, that adults can command without hurting. I found it strange. Every time someone asked me to sweep the corridor or wash the dishes, my body stiffened. I expected a scolding. I expected a threat, but it never came. The other girls began to approach me, first with glances, then with shy questions. Where did we come from? Why did we get there? No one asked for details. It was like a silent code. Each of them knew that if they had made it that far, it was because the bug had caught up with them. Some came from orphanages, others from homes as bad as ours. There was one who spoke in her sleep in another language. Another wouldn't eat if there was a man around. And all of them, protected themselves as if life were a constant war. Rachel was firm, but affectionate. She called everyone her daughter. When someone made a mess, she didn't shout. She sat next to them, looked them in the eye, and spoke calmly. It was a new way, which was more frightening than shouting, because it showed that it was possible to be an adult without being a monster. It moved me. One afternoon, she called me to talk. She asked how I was feeling. I replied with an automatic, "I'm fine." She didn't insist. She just said that when I really wanted to talk, she would listen. She gave me a folder with blank pages. She said I could write whatever I wanted, or draw, or just tear up the paper if I needed to. That gesture got to me. I went to my room and stared at the pages for hours. Then I started writing. Not in anger, not with fear. I wrote because, for the first time, I felt that someone would read it without judging me. Debbie started to laugh. She laughed quietly, a little shyly, but she laughed. She ran around the yard with a girl called Naomi. The two of them invented games, jumped rope, drew on the ground with pebbles. It was like seeing a miracle. The same child who had spent months clinging to me without a voice was now playing. Rachel saw it and hugged me. She said that when a child laughs again, the whole world is grateful. But not everything was light. At night, the nightmares came. I would wake up sweating and breathless. Occasionally, I would scream. The other girls said it was normal, that everyone there screamed in their sleep from time to time. It was as if we were cleaning out the ghosts while our bodies rested. One day, a reporter came by. Rachel said she wanted to tell the story of the house without exposing anyone. To show that there was salvation, she asked if I wanted to talk. I thought about it but refused. It wasn't time yet, but I promised that one day I would. Not to her, to whoever needed to hear. I started helping Rachel with the bigger tasks. Cooking, shopping, looking after the younger ones. She told me that I was good at caring, that I was observant, patient. I laughed inside. Patient? It wasn't a choice, it was survival. But seeing someone recognize that as a quality made me think that maybe I was more than just what he did to me. I received a new notebook, hardcover, blue. I wrote in it every day, things I remembered, things that hurt, things I dreamed about. In it, I also wrote a promise. I was going to grow up. I was going to work. I was going to make sure that no girl went through what Debbie and I went through. I was going to protect, teach, and shout for those who had no voice. That notebook became my map, my escape plan from the past. Time passed. Rachel started talking about adoption. She said there was a couple interested in meeting us. I went on alert. I asked if they were going to split up. She said no. She would only introduce people who would accept both of us. And so we met Emma and Charles, two retired teachers, no children, with sincere smiles. They talked to us for hours. They didn't force sympathy. They just listened. They talked about their house, their small town, their old dog called Duke, Debbie liked it instantly. I got defensive. They invited us to spend a weekend with them. Rachel tagged along. The house was simple but cozy. Emma cooked well. Charles told bad jokes. It smelled like home, but I was still waiting for the shout, the key, the scolding, and it didn't come. On Sunday night, we went back to Rachel's house, and for the first time, Debbie cried because she wanted to go back. Rachel saw it and said, "You can, if you want to." I needed more time, more days writing, more nights without nightmares, more confidence in silence. When I decided, it was with my heart in my hand. Emma and Charles's house had large windows and a yard full of dry leaves. The floor creaked when we walked, and the smell was of cake baking even when there was no cake. It was a place of light silence, the kind that doesn't hurt. But even so, it took my body a while to understand that no one was going to hit, lock, or curse me. I walked slowly, expecting to be startled. Debbie didn't. She ran straight out to meet the dog, went into her room with her backpack still on her back, and was already drawing when we had barely taken our shoes off. Emma spoke calmly, always looking us in the eye. Charles made old movie jokes and laughed at his own voice. They didn't ask too many questions or pretend to understand everything. They just said that we could stay as long as we needed, without rushing. It was a no-pressure agreement, but it made me tense, because in my mind, everything that starts well ends suddenly, and I still slept with one eye open, afraid of the sound of the key that was no longer coming. The new school was small. There was only one class per grade, and everyone seemed to know each other from the cradle. At first, the other students whispered. They asked where we came from, why we lived with that couple. They said we were children of the system. I didn't answer much. Debbie just smiled, made friends with anyone who spoke to her, and drew in her notebook all the time. Teachers noticed our differences. The coordinator called Emma and Charles a few times. They came back saying that everything was fine, that the school wanted to help. But I could see in Emma's eyes that veiled fear that one day someone would take us away again. I started to get better when Charles taught me how to work in the garden. He gave me a hoe and large gloves and said that planting good things helps to get rid of the bad. At first, I just dug holes to get my mind off things. But then I started paying attention to the timing of the seeds, the right water, the shape of the leaves. It was like taking care of something that didn't speak, but thanked me. Debbie liked it too. She chose her own corner, where she planted sunflowers that we didn't even know were going to thrive. They grew crooked, but strong, just like us. The nights became lighter. Sometimes I still woke up startled, but less so, and I no longer expected him to walk through the door. The memories still came, but with less force. It was as if the past was screaming from afar, and I managed to close the window in time. Emma noticed. One day, she left a new diary on my bed, with an embroidered cover and a blue pen. No note, no explanation. She just left it there. I understood. It was her saying, "Go on." I started writing non-stop, not about what happened, but about what I wanted. I imagined a future where we had our own house, where I was big enough to protect girls like us. I wrote down plans, ideas, even names of places where I wanted to live. It was like drawing freedom on paper, and that became a shield. Debbie, on the other hand, blossomed as if she had never wilted. She ran around the yard, read aloud, laughed at Charles's jokes. Sometimes it scared me to see how she had adapted, but Rachel had said that children are like that. If you give them space, they grow where the sun shines. And Debbie was seeing the sun for the first time. One Sunday afternoon, Emma proposed a walk. She said she had a surprise. We took the car and drove to a white house with a veranda and a wooden swing. She said the place was ours if we wanted it. An elderly neighbor was moving in with his son and wanted to sell cheap. Charles said he could afford it. It wasn't a gift, it was a choice. They wanted the place to be our final home. I balked. I said it was too much, that we didn't deserve it. Emma knelt down in front of me, held my hands and said quietly, "You deserve it. You just don't believe it yet." We accepted. Scared, of course, with our feet back, but we accepted. We moved in November. The air still smelled of fresh paint. We organized the furniture together, pasted Debbie's drawings on the wall, arranged a corner for Duke to lie down. The first night there, I slept on the mattress without a sheet, listening to the sound of the empty street, and I felt something I didn't recognize at first. Then I realized it was peace. But like everything else in life, peace was also tested. A month later, we received a letter, handwritten address. I recognized the handwriting. Mother. I opened it, trembling. She said she wanted to see us, that she missed us, that the man had changed, that they were going to church now, that they were a different family. Emma was in shock. Charles took the letter from my hand, read it silently, then tore it up slowly. He said that no one was going to force us to do anything. I thought about it for days. Debbie didn't care. She said she already had a family, and that was the first time she'd said it like that. I was still trying to figure out if I needed to answer, if ignoring it was cowardice. But then I remembered what she did when the social worker showed up, what she didn't do, what she allowed, and I decided I was no longer going to give an explanation to someone who let us suffer. I started working in a grocery store in town. Charles took me on the first day. He said that trust starts with small steps. I swept, organized shelves, helped at the checkout. The owner liked me. He said I was good at it. And for the first time, I got my own money. I bought Debbie ice cream and an old radio so we could listen to music. The weeks turned into months. Debbie's birthday arrived. Emma made a cake, invited 2 friends from school. We sang happy birthday with a crooked candle and hot soda. She cried when it was time to blow it out. Not from sadness, but from surprise. She'd never had a party before. I continued studying. I read at night, did my homework in the corner of the living room table. I planned to take the university entrance exam one day. I wrote an essay on invisible violence. The teacher read it and asked if it was based on anyone. I replied, "It's based on everyone you don't see," and he kept quiet. It was supposed to be just another ordinary evening. Debbie was drawing on the balcony, Emma was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, and I was packing my backpack with my school notebooks. The routine was almost comfortable. The day had passed lightly, and I even laughed at a silly joke Charles made at lunchtime. Laughing, in fact, no longer seemed like a sin. But then the bell rang. Twice. Slowly. It wasn't a neighbor's ring or a salesman's ring. It was different. Do you know when the body feels before the mind understands? This was it. My hands froze. Emma looked out of the window, then looked at me. Without saying anything, she understood. I opened the door slowly, my heart pounding in my neck. A man in a light suit, a crooked tie and dark glasses. He introduced himself as a bailiff. He was carrying an envelope, yellowed paper, and a face like he just wanted to get the job done and leave. He handed over the summons and asked us to sign for it. Emma read it. She choked. She pulled me inside. Charles came right over. Debbie, poor thing, kept drawing, unaware that peace was about to break out again. It was a formal request for visitation. Mom wanted to see us. She claimed it was her right, that she had moved, that her current home wasn't legally permanent. She used words she never knew how to write. Clearly she had the help of a lawyer, probably one of those who likes a family reunion case, just to make it look good in the local paper. I stayed silent, not out of fear. Anger that they thought that now, after everything, she could come out and say she wanted to be a mother. Where was she when he handcuffed us? Where did she hide while we cried in the dark with numb legs and a bruised wrist? Now when our skin was beginning to heal, did she want to come back? Rachel was called. She came back from the big city just to support us. She said she had contacts, that she wasn't going to let us be taken away. Emma was determined. Charles, ready to fight the world. But I was overcome by a tiredness I couldn't name. The fear of going back wasn't just physical. It was emotional, because only those who have had their childhood snatched away with a dirty hand know the value of an open window. Over the next few days, everything revolved around this. Meetings, phone calls, a public lawyer, paperwork. Debbie started having nightmares again. She would wake up crying, asking if we were leaving. I hugged her and told her no. Even though I wasn't sure, I said it, because promising her was like signing a contract with God, and I couldn't break it again. At school, I noticed whispers. The news leaked out. Shelter child, court case, possible return to biological family. A beautiful title for a tragedy that we fought to bury. I pretended not to hear, but it hurt. Every time someone looked away, I remembered the basement and the handcuffs. The judge scheduled a hearing. Rachel said I could speak, that my voice counted, that I was older now, almost of legal age to decide. They prepared me. They practiced questions, answers, how to stay calm. But how do you stay calm when your story becomes an argument in other people's mouths? The day arrived. I put on the simplest clothes I had. I didn't want to look poor. I wanted to look real. Debbie was dismissed. She stayed with Emma. When I entered the courtroom, I saw her sitting down. Mom. Her hair was tied up. Her clothes were neat. She looked like a saint. Next to her, a man who claimed to be a pastor. He must have been the new savior of the day. She looked at me. I didn't reciprocate. The judge began formally. He asked if I wanted to speak. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out. I told what I could without embarrassing my sister. I talked about what we had lived through, the pain, the cowardice. I said that it's not about sorrow, it's about memory, and that there are things you can't forgive with a visit and a cornmeal cake. I finished by saying that the family that took me in wasn't a substitute. It was a choice, and that choosing who truly loves you should be your right. Silence. Mom was crying, but those tears no longer reached me. The decision came down a few days later. Visitation was denied. The judge recognized our right to remain where we were. He said that biological ties can't outweigh emotional well-being. Emma cried. Charles hugged us, as if to thank us for continuing to protect him. We returned home with soft legs, but light chests. For the first time, I felt that we had won. Not a war, but an important battle. Rachel stayed late. We had dinner together. She said that now the most beautiful part of our story was beginning, living without fear. Over the next few weeks, Debbie slept peacefully again. I went back to work. I wrote more. I started thinking about studying psychology. I wanted to understand why so many people repeat pain without realizing it. One day, I wanted to help girls talk before they shut up inside. Time passed. The house continued to be filled with the smell of cake, barking dogs, and silly laughter. But now it was all more ours, more solid. And I learned something that I carry with me to this day. Sometimes the best revenge is to live well. I started helping Rachel at the talk she gave, at first just observing, then holding the microphone, handing out papers, writing down questions. One day, she asked me to tell a little of my story at a school in a neighboring town. I thought about refusing, but something inside me pushed me away. Perhaps it was the desire to turn that pent-up pain into something useful. I went. I spoke in a low voice, looking at the floor, but I spoke. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Then came the applause. It wasn't celebration, it was respect. I understood there that what hurts us can also serve as shelter for those who are trying to survive. I went home with a light body and a full head. Emma was thrilled. Charles prepared lemonade as if it were a party. Debbie drew the scene and stuck it on our bedroom wall. We never spoke of that court, the subpoena, or Mom again. It was buried in a deep corner, without a tombstone. Now the focus was different. Life went on, and it required presence. And presence was what we had decided to offer. I signed up for a technical course in social assistance. Rachel helped with the paperwork. Emma provided transportation. Charles, as always, showed up with a new backpack. It was an evening course, 3 times a week. I went by bus and came back late. But every night when I arrived, I found a note from Debbie stuck to the door. Good class. I love you. I miss you. That gave me strength. I met other girls on the course. Each one had a story full of cracks. Some came from violent homes, others from direct abandonment. We understood each other without much talk. It was a kind of silent sisterhood. We laughed at silly things, cried for no reason, and dreamed big. For the first time, dreaming didn't feel like a sin. Debbie was growing up fast. She could read fluently, write short stories, and liked to paint. Emma enrolled her in art classes. The teacher said she had talent. I said that she had survived, and that in itself was a gift. She said she wanted to write a book one day, to tell what we went through, but without showing everything, just like you do. I thought it was beautiful. During one of the talks, a girl from the audience raised her hand. She had curly hair and frightened eyes. She asked how sure I was that I was safe now. I froze. Then I replied, You never are, but you learn to walk even with fear on your side." She cried. She hugged me afterwards. She said she lived with her uncle and that things there weren't as they should be. I gave her Rachel's number, and I hoped she'd have the courage to call. I went home that day thinking about how many uncles' girls there were out there. Stepfather's girls, grandfather's girls, brother's girls, girls of silence. And it made me so angry with the world, but even more eager to shout for all of them. Rachel invited me to join the foster care project. It was a group of women who offered emergency support to children and teenagers at risk. I agreed. At first I just watched, but then I started to take an active part. I was the first former shelter worker to become a volunteer counselor. They said that my presence there showed that it was possible to come out the other side alive. Not with everything in place, but alive. Charles and Emma followed everything. At dinner they would ask how the day had been and comment on the stories with attention. It wasn't morbid curiosity, it was genuine interest. They wanted to learn. Emma said she always thought she was a good mother until she really got to know what it meant to look after someone who was broken. Charles said that we taught them more than any university. On my 18th birthday, Debbie made a cake with sugar icing that looked like glue. Charles sang out of tune. Emma bought a necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a key. "To remind you that you now hold your own doors," I cried. I cried a lot because I knew what it meant to have control of the key. That night, before going to sleep, I wrote in my diary, "I was happy all day today, without interruption." It was the first time I'd written that, and the first time I felt guilt-free. I passed the final exam of the course. I got a certificate. Rachel pointed me in the direction of a newly opened shelter where former residents could act as support. I was accepted. On my first night at work, I sat in the corridor and heard a little girl crying from the next room. I didn't go in. I just stayed there, breathing with her, and that was enough. Sometimes presence is what saves. The following month, the girl you hugged after the talk arrived at the shelter. She came frightened, with few clothes and many hidden injuries. When she saw me, she smiled. She said she had finally called. She hugged me like I was home. I held her tight, like someone holding the past and the future at the same time. Time passed, and, little by little, the memory settled into a corner that didn't hurt so much. I thought I was over it, that the wounds were well covered, stitched up with care and silence. Working in the shelter helped, listening to the stories of other girls, seeing in them a reflection of what we were. It was like looking in a cracked mirror and recognizing that, even without repairing it, you could still see the whole picture. Debbie continued to grow like a stubborn flower. She was already drawing in colors she hadn't even known how to use before, and she talked about her childhood as if it had only been half sad, half cloudy. Emma said that was good. That memory sometimes knows how to filter in order to protect. One Sunday, we were having lunch in the backyard. Charles was telling a story about the family's old dog. Debbie was laughing with her mouth full of ice cream, and Emma was arranging the napkins like someone who organizes the world. Everything seemed normal, light, until the phone rang. I answered it without thinking. A social worker from the county wanted to talk. She said she needed to see me in person, that it was urgent. My hand was sweating. I didn't ask for details. I just made an appointment. I went the next day. She greeted me looking like she was carrying heavy news. She handed me a folder. In it were documents, medical reports, and a name I hadn't read in ages. My stepfather. That man. He was in a local hospital, terminal cancer. According to the report, he asked to see me. He didn't want to confess or apologize. He just wanted to talk to me. The assistant said it was my right to decide. No one would force me, but if I wanted to, there was a window of time. Not much. I went home with a cold body. Emma noticed. She asked what had happened. I told her. Charles got up and walked around the room, not knowing what to do. Debbie overheard and cried, not out of fear, out of anger. She said he didn't deserve it. He shouldn't even be breathing. And I understood, but part of me couldn't ignore what that news provoked. It was as if the ground was shaking again, as if the locked doors of memory were being forced open. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the handcuffs, the smell of alcohol, the long nights of pain and shame. And then I thought about myself today, firm, safe, the owner of my name. I thought of Debbie, the girl who was almost erased and who now painted rainbows on the wall, and then I decided. I went, alone. The hospital was cold. The corridor smelled of disinfectant and expired stuff. They took me to his room, told me he was weak, that he couldn't talk much. I went in with my hands clenched. There he was, thin, pale, with none of that man who terrified me. He looked different, but he was still the same. He saw me and tried to smile. I didn't smile back. I sat down. I waited for him to say something, but he didn't. He just looked at me, as if he could understand everything by looking at me. And maybe he did. We sat in silence for minutes that seemed like hours. At one point, he tried to take my hand. I pulled away, not angrily, with dignity. I stood up. Before I left, I said just one thing. You didn't win. And I left. I arrived home with shaky legs, but a calm heart. Emma hugged me. Charles squeezed my shoulder. Debbie was waiting for me with tea. Nobody asked anything, and that was the best they could do. They let me digest in my own time. The following week, I received the news that he had died. No celebration, no crying, just a cycle closing. Rachel called. She said she was proud, that few people have the courage to face their monsters head on. I didn't want applause. I just wanted to keep going. I decided to write it all down, in detail, in chapters, not for publication, not for vanity, but to keep it, so that one day, when Debbie wants to remember clearly, she'll have somewhere to look. And so that, if any girl crosses my path with the same look of fear that I carried, I can hand over these pages like someone hands over a shelter. Emma offered me a corner of the living room to turn into an office. Charles hung up shelves. Debbie designed the cover of my book. I wrote day after day. I relived everything. It hurt, it bled, but it freed me. I put in there everything I'd never said out loud. I wrote with fury, with love, with a thirst for justice, and when I finished, I felt that something inside me was finally resting. I received invitations to tell my story elsewhere. I accepted some. I refused others. I chose where and how to speak, because now it's up to me. And choosing is what hurts the most when you come from a past where everything was imposed. But it's also the most healing. The first time someone called me a writer, I almost laughed. It was at a small talk in a neighborhood school. A girl stood up at the end and said, "Thank you for your book." It saved me. I stared at her, with that old notebook in her hands, with the yellowed pages and the shaky handwriting from the hard days. And I realized that, yes, what I had written had become something bigger than me. The story I thought was mine alone was now the story of others. And if for me it was a scar, for them it was a compass. And that's how I understood that telling hurts, but saves. The book was published, not in a big publishing house, nor with a flashy launch. But it came out. Rachel helped with the contacts, Emma proofread every page, Charles loaded the boxes with copies to distribute at fairs, schools, and support meetings. Debbie did the cover illustration, 2 girls holding hands, looking at an ajar door. It was beautiful, simple, and it said it all. They started calling me to more places, people wanting to listen, to ask, to understand, mothers, teachers, psychologists, even judges. And the more I spoke, the more I realized that my story wasn't unique. It was just one of many. Many girls trapped inside houses with the smell of lunch and muffled moans. Girls who came home from school and knew what was waiting for them behind the locked door. I said what nobody likes to hear, that it's not always the strange neighbor who hurts. Sometimes it's the one who sits at the table with you, who says goodnight, who kisses you on the forehead. And yet there were still people who didn't want to listen. Once a lady stopped me in the street and said it was better to forget, that dwelling on the past only brought misfortune. I smiled. She said that forgetting is a luxury for those who have never had their souls beaten. Those who survive remember, not out of anger, out of instinct, because remembering is keeping the warning alive. It's to prevent it from happening again. And she kept quiet. For the first time, someone kept quiet because they listened. Debbie grew up. She finished high school with honors. She went to art college. One day, she told me that she wanted to work with children, that she was going to use colors to heal the holes that no one sees. Emma cried as she listened. Charles said she was better than any president. I just watched, thinking about the girl who used to sleep handcuffed next to me and was now drawing her own path, not with a borrowed pencil, but with the firm hand of someone who knows what she deserves. Rachel got older. She was still coordinating the project, but now more calmly. She asked me to take on some of the work. She said it was my turn, that she had only been a bridge. I accepted. I set up a listening group, a space for women only. No compulsory questions, no judgment, just presence. And there I saw things blossom that the world tried to snatch away. One of them, a girl in her early 20s, once looked at me and said, "You're the first adult I've ever trusted." I hugged her so tightly that I felt my whole past shaking. Emma fell ill, one of those illnesses that eats away at you little by little. But even on the weekdays, she smiled. She said she'd never imagined being a mother like this, in this messy and profound way. She thanked me for letting her take care of it. I cried in hiding. Charles held on tight, as always. On her last day, we were all there. Debbie painted a flower on the hospital sheet. I read a passage from my book quietly. Charles held her hand, and she left with a light sigh, like someone who knew she'd done everything she needed to do. Charles died 2 years later. In his sleep, Debbie said he'd only gone to find Emma, and I like to believe that the two of them are together, looking after us from afar. And when the silence in the house tightens, I can still hear the sound of his laughter coming from the kitchen. Today, at 82, I look back and see a crooked line, full of holes, but firm. Everything we've been through, all the doors we've closed, all the screams we've swallowed, have become the raw material for what we've built. And I don't regret a thing. Not the dark days, not the dreams deferred, because every tear that fell on that filthy mattress in the back room was transformed into a word, a gesture, a seed. And if today there are girls sleeping with fear and waking up with courage, part of that is because we didn't keep quiet. The book is now in its 3rd edition. The group has grown. The house Emma bought has become a hostel. Debbie coordinates art workshops, and I continue to write, sometimes at dawn, with an aching back and a full mind. But I carry on, because there's always someone who needs to hear that you can get out of the basement. That fear doesn't last forever. That surviving is only the first step. And now, if you've made it this far, dear, do me a favor. Share this story with someone, with everyone, because some things just can't die quietly. And if I can sit here today and tell you all this, it's because you listened. And just because you stayed with me until the end, it was worth telling.